Ever wonder what it really takes to make zero trust work in practice? Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, the podcast that cuts through the noise and dives into real stories and strategies to bring zero trust to life. The cybersecurity world is flooded with buzzwords and vendor hype, but here we focus on what truly matters, practical insights and lessons from those who've walked the path. Each episode is inspired by real experiences, grounded in our research, and enriched by the challenges and triumphs of our guests. If you're ready to grow your skills, deepen your insights, and take actionable steps toward a stronger zero trust strategy, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. The views and opinions expressed on the Zero Trust Journey podcast, webcast are solely those of the participants and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. This content is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Neither the employers nor any sponsors are liable for actions taken based on the content discussed.
Welcome to another session of Zero Trust Journey. This is a topic where we have heard it's still a myth, still a marketing buzzword, and a lot of people have used it to mature in their Zero Trust journey. And going from the traditional model of where I have everything under my control because I know people are coming into my network, to something that now we use any device, any network, anywhere. So this is where Zero Trust strategy comes in. We bring different guests from industry leaders and talk about what they are seeing and hearing about Zero Trust. With me today, I have Chris. Chris is Director of CXO at Zscaler. I'm going to pass it on to Chris for a quick introduction, where he works, his function, and his company.
Thank you very much for welcoming to the show. It's great to be here. Yes, I have the privilege of running CXO Revolutionaries, which is a media property on Zscaler's brand. And I work with a lot of CXOs, internal and external, on thought leadership. I've been at the company for almost 4 years now, and it's great to be working for a market leader, doing a lot of similar kinds of things that you're doing here, Doctor, like podcasts and videos and et cetera.
One of the things that why I reached out to you, Chris, your article on Cloud Security Alliance blog about CTEM and Zero Trust. So let's kick it off with that. What prompted you to write a blog about it? What was something that you wanted to put it out there to the audience that CTEM and Zero Trust, where is the cross-pollination, and what do you want to highlight to our audience?
Yeah, well, Zscaler released a product in the CTEM portfolio, which we could talk about in a little bit. But CTEM and the intersection of Zero Trust, I felt like was an underrepresented thought leadership space because of how the two interrelate. I mean, think about it. Zero Trust, it's all about securing how people and workloads connect to applications, data, and services. And then when you capture the data, the telemetry behind that, what a perfect conduit to get that information into a CTEM platform. So this data becomes a unique contributor to understanding the exposures. And as the CTEM platform identifies the security gaps, it can then trigger additional controls, say it's automated policy, segmentation, et cetera, enabling you to dynamically adjust your zero trust architecture to further reduce risk. And I would add that because of my background, I've been in AI and ML for a while now at Adobe and previous companies before it really took off in the Gen AI space. And it was clear to me that there are some things that are not really much for the human intelligence to handle anymore, where there's tremendous data. I mean, we have 500 billion transactions daily on the Zero Trust Exchange. All that has to move to a non-human intelligence to be able to turn it into actionable insights and take appropriate action. And those data loops that I talk about in that article are pretty much what I think we're going to see more and more of going forward. So I'll start with that and take a break and see what your reactions are.
Yeah, with me, I have co-host Steve Turner as well. Steve and I, we do a lot of research at Zero Trust Journey. We talk to a lot of people. And one of the things always stand out where, how do I verify? How do I check what I'm doing is right or wrong? But where is my rubric to measure my maturity against the Zero Trust? Yes, we have ZTMM maturity model. We have from Jason ZTMM Plus. But for those who are just starting their journey, Steve, anything you want to add to it? What Chris just mentioned about the CTEM and the overlapping with the Zero Trust?
I'd love to ask a question from your viewpoint, Chris. Like, interacting with the C-suite and kind of talking to that audience, especially when you're talking about some of the newer concepts around CTEM and everything like that, what are you hearing from them? Like when it comes to them pursuing their zero trust journey, like what, is top of mind? What do they don't get? What do they yell at you about? Like when, you're trying to communicate with them or try to pull some of those narratives out.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in that because depending on which company you speak to, you might hear a very different journey, right? But in general, it is more of a change management challenge than it is a technical one, because we all know the modernization of cybersecurity is here, and zero trust is the leading edge of what you could be doing for secure access, right? Maybe in 10 years' time, it's going to be subsumed into other platforms and technologies, and we'll be talking about something else. Maybe it's going to be more around, using our biology, and et cetera. And I would say the first trigger that usually gets a Fortune 2000 really kickstarted on a journey is either a breach or a mandate to get ahead of cyber risk and being able to manage and mitigate it better. But once you combine that with the realization that you could cut complexity and cut costs and improve user experience at the same time, it's enough usually to come over the inertia. Because as we all know, and I'm sure you gentlemen have spoken to many people about what it's like on the front lines of implementing a zero trust journey, there is a lot of impact. There's a lot of unknowns. You're more or less moving to a new paradigm where network and security in particular need to come together and really figure out how they're going to work together going forward in a new kind of operating model.
And so kind of like in that lens, when you come into those conversations, what have you found that you can give them the most actionable piece of advice? Like maybe you hear something that they say, some of the things that you mentioned, like just change management being a challenge even before zero trust came along for a lot of organizations. I'd love to hear, it's like when you hear those conversations, like what pops into your mind to be like, hey, CISO, hey, CIO, hey, so-and-so who I'm talking to, like, here's some things that we can take action on immediately to help you kind of go down this path or evolve what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, Steve, starting small and proving a proof of concept is going to be the way to build champions, because it's usually one or two people in the C-suite who may get the vision. And by the way, transformation is always going to start at that level. It's rare that you find it all the way at the front lines, only because it's where people are very comfortable, right, with the network technologies they've been using, like NAC, VPNs, firewalls, et cetera. That being said, it could happen in the middle too. We've seen bidirectional influence to get a project underway. But it really is going to be somebody in a C-suite championing some proof of concept, getting that first win and overcoming the psychology of that inertia. And maybe it's just getting one branch over onto a ZTA, and you have, say, several. And that is enough to prove that this is a good direction to go in. Because as you both know, after you get your users over to zero trust, you got workloads, you got your different branches, you have third parties, right? OT, IoT. The journey is just going to keep going on for years for many of these large enterprises. And being able to communicate the benefits across the departments and across those impacted during implementation is a very powerful way and a best practice in change management. So it's not just about telling the CFO that you're going to save 50% on hardware costs, but it's also explaining to the end user why they need to download an agent, on their laptop and use MFA, continuously rather than getting onto a VPN. Hopefully that they'll immediately see the benefit of moving to a zero trust at that point.
Yeah, let me double click on the part where you mentioned that usually it's starting from the top or the middle. And when we speak to our audience or when we do our surveys, our time, the respondents are saying that we struggle to find a reason why zero trust. Like, why do we start it? We have a security program, we align with NIST CSF, we have SSO, we have all the NDR, XDR, EDR, pick all the acronym. Steve called it bingo board. So pick all the acronym on that board and we have it. What's zero trust bringing on the table now? And it's something Steve and I, and obviously including yourself, you get it. But what do you respond to that? How do you respond to those situations where the top management or middle, they're saying we understand on paper what zero trust is, but How do I explain that? How do I actually really make it understand, to your point, to business leaders, this is going to help?
Yeah. Well, if it's not just about cost containment, if you need more impetus to migrate, you could look at examples in your industry where there was a breach and break down the attack chain to understand why one of your peers suffered from a ransomware attack. And then looking through what vulnerability or exposure was exploited, and then figuring out, well, what could have stopped it? And in most cases, it's blocking the ability to move laterally. Lateral propagation is one of the key, in my view, one of the key differentiators. Of course, reducing the attack surface and least privilege, all the different principles apply. But when lateral movement occurs, that's really when a hacker can do some serious damage, because they're well on their way to looking more and more like a user, and they can find the crown jewels. And that's when you suffer from unimaginable reputation, financial loss, all the things that board members are very fearful of these days. But you're right. How do you get somebody to invest in something that may or may not happen? There's an insurance mindset to this.
Yeah, and it's not just that, right, Chris? It's also something already exists in the organization. There's already a security program. So the business leaders see this as, hey, last year we started on this journey or whatever that project was. This year you're saying we are starting to adopt zero trust strategy. I'm interested in your thoughts. We obviously have our opinions. We talked about it during the show as well. And I'm interested in your opinions where the security program exists. How do you sell zero trust strategy?
Yeah, I'd say ultimately, when you see what benefits, the knock-on benefits of moving to zero trust, because you're securing digital business models of tomorrow. You're doing it today. So you're solving some of the challenges of tomorrow. And if you're doing that and your competitors are not, what is the implication of that? You're going to be more agile. The cost of change is going to be less as you go forward, because you're going to be able to do mergers and acquisitions faster. I mean, that's a great use case of zero trust. We could talk about that. I've been working with that team quite prolifically these days about a zero IT footprint merger, where on day one, everybody at the acquired company could access all of the resources and services of the buyer, right? So when you look at that agility, that's going to be something that's going to make you more competitive and be able to move faster in a world that's going to be ever more competitive due to AI, due to automation, and all these emerging technologies. So do you want to be left behind patching firewalls, looking for CVEs that are impacting all your different security appliances that are continuously broadcasting their IP to the internet?
Yeah, the people are saying no in the audience here.
I hope they're screaming now.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir, but that's one thing that I see, because I ask the same question. I sometimes go, well, if you free up all the time for IT so they don't have to sit there and find problems to resolve, what are they doing instead? And that's a great conversation to have, to see what they could be doing with their time, their talents, to move further up that value chain instead of chasing vulnerabilities.
I'm smiling because Steve and we recently were on a call doing a survey, and the person was saying that my employees are scared that we are adopting automation and using AI, that we're taking away their jobs. And Steve and I both jumped and asked the same question, that do you not want more time in their hands? Do you not want more time in their day so they can work on things that they've been wanting to do it and they just don't have time? Because if you walk into any CISO or CIO and ask them, would you like to hire more people? 99.9% answer is yes, I need more people. I need more people. If I give you time and automate some of those things, you will get time back into your day, and then you can actually focus on the things that you've been wanting to. So that's why I'm laughing at it or smiling here, because that's usually the scarcity, is that, oh, automation is taking away my job. But you told me yesterday you want to hire more people, or you need more people in the team. I'm giving you exactly what you asked for in a different form of way. So time is currency. I'm giving you your currency back. That's why. Steve, sorry I interrupted you. You were going to ask me.
No. I love where you're going with that, because I think it dovetails into a thread I wanted to pull around some of the things you were talking about, Chris. So, knowing that Zscaler's heritage came from the network realm, right? Like displacing all the things that you were talking about, VPNs, traditional firewalls, those types of things. I wanted to pull on that thread some more, as you were talking about the security lens. How have you seen, when you have those conversations, arguing that organizations should move towards a zero trust architecture, how does network fit into that conversation from a user experience standpoint? What, do these modern network solutions offer that a VPN can't offer an organization or a traditional firewall can't offer an organization, both from that security and that user experience perspective?
When you say modern network, is it devices? Is it solutions? What are you referring to? Next gen firewalls or?
Yeah, so the way that I look at it, right, is, you talk about ripping out VPNs. The natural solution there for a lot of folks is a ZTNA solution or zero trust network access solution. When you talk about kind of ripping out traditional firewalls, then, what's replacing that? In a lot of senses or a lot of situations, it's moving to a consolidated network security stack like a SASE solution or an SSE solution, depending on what term gets you all jazzed up. But, I know that Zscaler plays very firmly in that space. So I'd imagine that a lot of the conversations that you have involve kind of that transformation from, the very perimeter-based, edge-based protection methodology to modernizing to this integrated like network security stack. And curious to hear, like what you've heard from folks as they pursue that, or maybe they poo-poo it and say like, my firewalls have protected me forever. We've never had a breach. We're all good.
Yeah. Well, I do hear a lot about coexistence because nobody's going to on day one replace everything. There's contracts,
There's people.
there's people who are going to continue to run with what they have because even though it might be a good idea to move to a ZTNA, they never know exactly what's going to break when you flip the switch. And that's because there could be a legacy that isn't even documented from a generation ago. Somebody in the early 2000s implementing, SD-WANs, and nobody really knows what's going to happen if you turn it off, right? So I do see a lot of coexistence, and I don't think we're going to see firewalls go away. I mean, I was just looking at some market stats. I mean, there's still going to be a lot of investment, and maybe they have their use cases. There are some companies that, for any reason, they may just want to continue and just experiment with secure access through SSE, SASE, or ZTNA. So I don't think we're in the market of completely annihilating those different solutions, but showing that there is a better and cheaper way. And that's an option you could choose, especially if you have the right mindset to undergo such a secure digital transformation initiative, because there are some companies that they are stuck in legacy, and if it ain't broke, they won't fix it and they'll just remain, right? Perfectly fine.
No, I love what you're talking about there because, that I think a common myth, and that's kind of like why I wanted to pull on that thread. I think a common myth is that people say, see zero trust architecture and they're like, we have to modernize. So we have to rip out everything that's been there before and say, rip and replace everything. It's like, but that's not the reality of things, right? Like, to your point, I know Victor and I have seen it, and some of my former colleagues at Forrester, when they published some of their firewall evaluations and everything that they've done kind of the space, they showed that there's still significant momentum in that space because these edge devices are needed as part of kind of the broader kind of protection or security mechanisms that companies are trying to implement. I love hearing when these things match up with the data points
This
Victor
gave me
reminded.
flashbacks actually. In 2015, cloud transformation, everybody's trying to go to cloud. And
Yeah.
2020, still companies realize that they're going to need some on-prem footprint, right? Around between 2012, 15, everybody's like, yes, by 2020, we're not going to have on-prem data centers at all. Everybody's going to be consuming cloud because it's so easy, infrastructure as code and all that. 2025, most of the conversations I had in 2015, they still have some footprint. To the same degree, what you just talk about coexistence now. Wherever it's possible, use cloud, makes sense, cheaper, flexibility, scalability, security, and all that. Wherever it doesn't make sense because it's just the reasons we need a data center on-prem, smaller footprint, that's how I see it. The mindset and I guess the intention is going to be zero trust, but there's going to be something that has to coexist because it's just that's how the business is run. I mean, you talk about enterprises, you go to a large healthcare company and tell them, starting tomorrow, zero trust, everything we are ripping and replacing. Yeah, they're going to laugh you out of the room. So that's the reality here.
Yeah. And it could take time before they make the leap. And who knows, by the time they do it, there'll be another shiny object.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But for now, we all would agree that it is probably the best option for most enterprise organizations. I did want to make one more point about the rationalization of hardware, getting more of the complexity out. I think that's a big deal for Zscaler's value proposition. There's a big push for the zero IT footprint branch office. Why can't you go to a branch if you're a salesperson and have the same experience as you would at Starbucks, accessing everything you would in the same manner? And that is not possible. And anything that makes the life easier for an end user is productivity, is a user experience that's going to lead to better outcomes. And when you multiply that out across an organization of 25, 30,000 plus, think about the benefits writ large.
One thing Steve and I were talking about it, and we would love to hear your perspective, or any audience out there. If you're listening, if you have any research data, just reach out to us. Where the developers, the DevOps, they get the point of security, but I think with the zero trust, they still haven't bought in, or they're not the key stakeholders yet. I feel like where when they're developing the applications that the company's users, employees, contractors, partners, they need to access, they don't keep zero trust principles in mind. So they develop an application that you can run it on-prem or you can run it cloud, and that's about it. But you still have to wrap them around the legacy security solutions that needs it. Because if I'm developing an application, put it in AWS now, but I still need a way to connect to it. Maybe a VPN wrapper or whatever that is, or authentication. Maybe another username password, because I didn't think about OAuth or I didn't think about SAML. Yes, I'm getting a little geeky in this conversation. My point is that developers who are developing the applications for the enterprises, I think they also needs to be informed about the zero trust principles, so that they know on the other end, when the user is using it, that's how they're going to consume it, because that's the approach we're going with. Because they still feel that as long as the access and the uptime is good, my IT responsibility as a developer is done. Yeah. Zero trust is beyond that. We just talked about it.
I've heard that too. For developers, on first glance, it feels more like here's another blocker from the security team, right?
Yes.
For me to get my work done. But if they had more of a DevSecOps mentality, and inside their software development lifecycle included security in mind, it's not just zero trust. They should be thinking about all aspects of security, making sure that what they're going to be pushing out to production doesn't have any exposures or vulnerabilities, right? So, but it's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, what I think's been interesting, again, kind of diving into this topic. Darn you, Victor, for diving into the geeky side of things. What I've traditionally seen, and interested to see if this comes up in your conversations, with the C-suite or maybe levels below that. But traditionally, security hasn't been designed for developers. It's been always an afterthought where they've had to purchase, a third-party solution to incorporate it, into their process. They've argued for Swiss cheese firewalls to make things happen, in order to realize whatever business app or thing that they're building. And now I feel like with zero trust architecture starting to become, kind of part of the general mind share, that developers as a persona, to address security from and still have usability there, seems to be something that is actually being addressed now. You see things like, and I promise I'm going to keep more of the buzzword bingo to a minimum here, but as we look at LLMs and the application of AI in a lot of these situations, having coding partners with these AI solutions and introducing secure coding practices at the same point around that, I would love to hear maybe on the network side of things, the identity side of things, like anything, around your thoughts in that space, anything that you've heard from folks that are talking to you about addressing that developer persona, from a security angle, so that, we're not just clamping down on those folks and saying no, like we're introducing additional paths or solutions that are incorporated into our security best practices to help them code better rather than be in their way, and be the security organization of no.
It definitely got more complicated for developers working with AI. The third-party supply chain, where you have code repositories that you're counting on to get kickstarted, now, those have already been shown to be affected, right? Whether it's data poisoning or other kinds of malicious acts that could render the models in a way where a regular security program won't even catch, because it's of a different nature when ML and AI is being tampered with, right? It could be just bad training data. So I think the first thought is the development leadership needs to expand what they think of in terms of the supply chain of code, right? And make sure that from A to Z, they're checking constantly and making sure that the right certifications are in place, they're working with the right vendors who themselves have proven to be viable and have a robust program. And then with agentic AI, I think it's only going to get even more complicated, right? So I'd like to hear what you have in mind that they could potentially do to have a secure by design mentality, because especially with the different flavors of AI threats that are coming, some are pretty obvious, right? Like a deep fake or a phishing email that is so realistic,
Yep.
so engineered with precision that a user is going to just click on it if it gets through. Like, it's going to happen. But then there's everything in the back end of that supply chain where you have no idea if there's going to be hallucinations in your models because of a third tier supplier of code did something wrong.
Yeah, Zach Pugh is our co-host, and I owe him $20 because I he bet on it that someone is going to mention agentic AI on this podcast, and I said no, we'll keep it kosher. But now I owe him $20. Jokes aside, I think two things it's happening in the industry right now for developers, at least what I see it as the AI usage is increasing, they are losing the touch of how the repos are built, what actually goes in the code. Because a lot of the developers actually I speak to, what they're doing is either they're taking a code or a sample code and saying, hey, this is my goal, here's example, build me something. That build me something, whatever the output is, nobody's verifying it anymore. Maybe some libraries are being used that's open source. It does the output, does the end result, but nobody's reviewing it. So that's one. Second, the companies who are using AI to review codes, not going to name any names, but the companies who made their names in actually reviewing the code in like static or dynamic, now they're using AI. Again, their models are trained by these data sets, which could be poisoned to begin with, right? So you could say if I'm using a Log4j, it's a really good library because it's being used by so many people, so it must be good. AI might make that decision, but human is not verifying it. Human is not checking it. So that supply chain is being polluted from the time it's being created to the time it's being verified to the time it's being actually used. So we will have a different problem in 5 years. I think it won't be a problem of creating software. It'll be a problem of now trusting, even if like all the verifications of Apple and Android have been done. How do we know what happened behind the scenes? It's doing everything on the face value, but what's happening behind the scenes, that's going to be a problem in 5 years as well.
That's right. And if you're a company that ends up using one of those subpar AI solutions, but you have zero trust, at least you'll have the guardrails in place that if things do go sideways, it could be caught, right? It could be
Exactly.
immediately put in a sandbox or inspected further, right?
You said it, right? So this is the more reasons why we are preaching on this podcast, where there's a lot out there, from the deepfakes to a lot of like LLM generated data. We can't trust everything. So this is where, like, if I can't control all the attack surface, let's talk about the protect surface. What I really care, let's just talk about that. Let's put all the guardrails around it. Let's use the principle of zero trust to guide our policies, our technology, our business operation, and use that to actually create a standard environment where this is how we operate at this company or this organization.
Very well put. Couldn't have said it better myself.
Steve?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love for tackling this, and I probably owe Zach $20 too because I brought it up, and that's my fault. So, but I think what's been really interesting around all of this, Chris, I love the call out that you made around this was, I was perusing Blue Sky yesterday, and there were some screenshots from Twitter where folks were like, look at this SaaS app that I built, within, a couple of hours. And then you see a reply, everybody stop hacking my SaaS app. You're breaking everything. I see a bunch of the fields were changed and the backend was manipulated. And so, it just goes to show that like secure coding practices, we still have a long way to go, around all of this, because these models are built on what we teach them, and so that's what's kind of incorporated into them. And then two, the point that you made, Chris, about the zero trust architecture, being the belt and suspenders around all of this, that if somebody does go and pursue one of these new technologies that is maybe not, 100% kosher around, putting these things out there in a secure way, we can secure the rest of our infrastructure using a zero trust architecture. Definitely curious to know, like, has there been any conversations that you've had with folks kind of around this where, maybe the CISOs you're talking to, the other C-suite folks, are talking about how they're leveraging, a lot of these AI coding solutions, to build things quicker, and, maybe their concerns around this. Maybe it's the same things that we're talking about here, but, yeah, would love to hear, some of that, from the conversations you're having with folks.
Yeah, the first thing that CISOs really started thinking about was how can their companies safely embrace AI, right? So whether it's public AI like ChatGPT and Perplexity, or private AI like building your own chatbot, right? So thankfully, like Zscaler jumped ahead and can provide solutions for both. So that's a good thing, but it may not answer everything that you just put on the table in terms of the different use cases. Is it in the product that you're talking about? Like, hey, I want to use AI in our offering to our clients. What does the CISO need to do there?
I'd love to hear about that. Just selfishly, I'd love to hear, from the vendor side of things. Everybody is chasing the AI bandwagon to say that our solution uses AI too. And curious to see, what have your customers been asking for? What, have you been able to offer them and kind of show and be kind of pragmatic, around all of that, rather than, maybe some of these startups that are trying to fill a very niche gap, with AI.
Yeah. Well, I know on the surface, there's like three distinct areas. How do you protect private and public AI use? And then how do you defend against malicious AI? So we have
Mhm.
that covered. And then customers want to know, well, how are you using AI in your solution, right? As an internal AI technology. So then there's two flavors of that. There's how we're using it to arm our employee population with the capabilities of AI that you see out in the public, right? The Gen AI Chat GPT style. How do you take that one FTE and make them a super human, right? More or less. And that work is underway. But the powered by, that's a very fascinating area as well, because every vendor is now touting this, right? We have AI, everybody's got AI. But where's the business value, and show me the proof that it's going to change things? And I think that's where the real battle space is in the market. And then when you go to RSA, I don't know if you'll be there in April and May, but I'm sure we'll hopefully see more and more examples of real world benefits of AI technology, either scaling or handling the problems that are meant for machines and not for humans. I think the area of so there's a solution called ZDX, Digital Experience Monitoring. I think that's a great example where Zscaler got ahead with the Copilot to show how you can remediate or locate and remediate application performance problems very quickly with the help of AI, right? Because there's just so much data being ingested, it's faster to pinpoint across that entire path where the source of an issue is. And you may have seen on these channels, like every time there's a Slack outage or CrowdStrike or what have you, there's always like this chart that comes off from Zscaler displaying what it actually looks like visualized and the potential impact it had, right?
Yeah.
So that's a great use case, but that one topic of like, well, how can Zscaler help with my own AI products? I think that might be an area to be explored down the.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. And we get these questions a lot of time, like how does zero trust and AI overlap in the conversation? So I like this episode where we talked about AI and zero trust. Let's wrap up with this one. Chris, you talk to CISOs, you talk to CXOs, you do market analysis as well, you write your own content. One question that we ask all of our guests, where do you think in the adoption rate when it comes to zero trust? If you talk to 10 people today, how many do you think they are interested and ready to adopt or have adopted zero trust, and how many are still on the fence of either considering it or they're still not sure how to actually prove the business value of zero trust? It doesn't have to be accurate data, just arbitrary ranges.
Yeah, it's hard to quantify only because everybody I'm speaking to is either a customer or on their way to becoming one.
Sure.
But I would say it's 8 to 9 at least. Yeah, the entire premise of CXO Revolutionaries is to take a story that isn't something that marketing would necessarily cover because it's granular, it's more editorial, it's very nuanced, and shine the light on it. And it's very audience centric. So it's very similar to what you're trying to do here. It's like it's education and it's information. In this case, it's 100 C-level customers generating content peer to peer. So I'm going to say we're going to see more and more. And I don't know what the next inflection point is. We don't need another pandemic, hopefully, or another major blow to critical infrastructure or anything along that, God forbid, but more of a gradual take up. And then maybe it'll just kind of go hockey stick at the end when it's pretty obvious that it's what everybody's using and it's the standard, right? I don't know if we saw that with things like blockchain, right? A lot of other hot technologies seem to have either just been buried into, places where it makes sense. I think zero trust is going to emerge out of that and be a bit more of a common, everyday, understood thing, at least in enterprise IT.
Yeah, we're betting on, I think someone is going to rename Zero Trust to something else. Not that Zero Trust is not a great name. We love it. We understand it. But I think to a non-IT or business people or putting it out there saying that we are starting a Zero Trust in our company is just immediately all employees are like, you don't trust me? So at that shock, we're trying to avoid it with whatever name someone want to come up with. But the point is that as long as we stop thinking that as long as I have a company issued laptop, I have company VPN, that I'm safe, I'm good, nothing can happen. I think that mentality has to go. And once that's understood that there is no longer trust, even if I have a company laptop, if I'm connected to VPN, if I'm using all the MFAs and 2FAs or all the FAs, at the end of the day, they are just FU and nobody's going to understand it. So we just need to adopt that. It does not matter if I'm using all the checklist. You just can't trust that what's going on in the wires, not the human, what's happening in our digital world. And every time we have to have an engine checking your identity, checking your application, checking your transaction. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? I think that mentality is going to adopt more and more. And companies are starting it, but we still have a flock of people where they are saying that it's good to know, but it just doesn't make sense. How do I explain this to business? I have a security program. I have this compliance things. And we have Chase Cunningham on the show as well. And he said that compliance is the bar, not the ceiling. So I think with that's where we're going with it. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember along those lines, there was a customer, and I can't remember who they were, but they didn't use that nomenclature when they're selling internally.
Sure. Yeah.
They made up their own secure access, this, that, whatever it was. So I encourage customers to do that, because you got to be able to communicate in a way that makes sense to your business. How the market decides to use it. I mean, Gartner has all different kinds of ways of talking about all these technologies like CTEM and CNAP and DSPM, et cetera. I think that's, I don't know, I mean, it's great, but at the same time, it just adds more things to consider, and their jobs are already hard enough.
Yeah, the best success stories we have heard where the zero trust principles were adopted very rapidly in the company, where they actually attach to a project or transformation or mission or a value to what company is trying to do. If you are a retail company trying to sell t-shirts, attach that project or strategy or principle to something that we make the best 100% cotton t-shirts, blah, blah, whatever that project is. And this is how we do it. Now everybody can understand, right? Our business is to sell t-shirts, 100% cotton, safely, securely, blah, blah. Everybody gets it. You add zero trust, they're like, what is it? Is it IT? Is it security? Talk about it in your business terms that everybody gets it because they're getting paid because of that. The company exists, hence they're getting paid. Everybody gets that. So attached to internal product names is something that's familiar to you.
Because then you're already like along the path of where the mind share is already focused, right?
Exactly.
And you're just piggybacking on it. Absolutely. It's a great idea.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with this one. One thing that, Chris, you want to give to our audience as you're walking away, that when they're thinking about zero trust, if they are already adopted, they're starting on their journey or they are on the journey, what's the one thing that you want to tell your audience and listeners that what you have gathered after all of that research, all the conversations, that one thing that you want to share?
Lead with the benefits in mind.
That's excellent. Yes. Bring the benefits in the forefront so that everybody can understand.
Thank you very much, Chris, for coming on the show and sharing your insights. I learned a little bit about kind of what you're hearing from the C-suite, in the conversations that you're facilitating and part of. Really appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you both for having me on the show.
No, thank you, Chris, for accepting my invitation and coming on and giving your insights. With that, thank you very much, all the listeners, and tuning into Zero Trust Journey. If you want to listen to all of our past episodes, go to ztjourney.com. So tune in and look at that information on our website as well. Chris, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us on Zero Trust Journey. If this episode sparked new ideas or gave you practical insights, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. Your support helps us continue bringing you valuable conversations and real-world stories. We'd love to hear from you. Share your feedback or even your own Zero Trust journey by reaching out to us. Your story could inspire others in the community. Stay tuned for more expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable advice to help you advance your Zero Trust strategy. Until next time, stay curious and keep making progress on your Zero Trust journey. See you in the next episode.